I never thought I'd be the guy posting on a relationship subreddit. Whenever I read stories here, I'd think, how do people not see the signs? Now I'm sitting alone in a rented apartment, staring at divorce papers, realizing that sometimes the signs are hidden behind the smile of the person you trust most. For context, my wife, Emma, and I were together for almost 9 years, married for 6. If you met Emma, you'd probably love her immediately. Everyone did. She baked cookies for our neighbors when they moved in. She remembered everyone's birthdays. She left little handwritten notes in my lunch bag. She called my mother every week just to check on her. When I got promoted at work, she surprised me by decorating the entire house with balloons. She was the kind of person people described as too good for this world, including me. Looking back, that's probably why I ignored so many things. About a year ago, small changes started happening. Nothing dramatic. She began working later than usual. Sometimes she'd say she was helping a coworker with projects. Other times she'd tell me she was attending networking events. Her explanations always sounded reasonable, and honestly, I trusted her completely. If she said the sky was green, I'd probably spend a minute wondering if I had somehow forgotten what color the sky was. The first thing that bothered me wasn't even suspicious. It was her phone. Emma had never cared if I used it. We'd grab each other's phones all the time. Then suddenly she became protective of it. Not aggressively, just subtly. She'd turn the screen away when texting. She started bringing it into the shower. At night she'd place it face down on the nightstand. If I walked into a room unexpectedly, I'd notice her lock the screen. When I asked about it, she'd smile and say, "I spend too much time on social media." I'm embarrassed, and somehow that answer always felt enough. Because it was Emma. Sweet, thoughtful Emma. The woman who kissed me goodbye every morning. The woman who still held my hand during movies. The woman who looked me in the eyes and told me she loved me every single day. I had no idea that while she was saying those words, an entirely different version of her existed somewhere else. And the strangest part? The first crack in the story didn't come from her phone. It came from a man I'd never met before. A man standing outside a grocery store on a rainy Tuesday evening. A man who looked at me like he'd seen a ghost, and then said my wife's name. That's when everything started to unravel. The man outside the grocery store looked about my age. Mid-30s, maybe. He was holding a paper bag and staring at me with this strange expression, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. At first, I thought he had mistaken me for someone else. I grabbed my groceries and started walking toward my car when he called out, "Hey." I turned around. He hesitated. Then he said, "You're Emma's husband, right?" That immediately got my attention. My wife wasn't famous. She wasn't involved in community groups. Random strangers didn't usually know who she was. "Yeah," I said. "Do I know you?" The guy looked confused. Actually, confused isn't the right word. He looked alarmed. For a few seconds he just stared at me. Then he laughed awkwardly. "No, sorry. I just thought." He stopped himself. "Thought what?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nothing. Forget it." At this point, my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. "How do you know Emma?" The guy looked genuinely uncomfortable. The kind of uncomfortable that makes everyone around them uncomfortable too. Finally, he said, "I work with her." That surprised me. Emma worked in marketing. I knew most of her co-workers because she'd talked about them for years. I didn't recognize this guy at all. "What department?" I asked. He immediately answered, "Sales." Reasonable enough. Still, something felt off. Then he said something that froze me. "She talks about you all the time." I smiled automatically, but before I could reply, he added, "At least she used to." There was an awkward silence. Rain was falling harder now. People were walking past us. And suddenly I felt like I was standing in the middle of a conversation where everyone except me knew what was happening. "What does that mean?" I asked. The guy looked like he regretted every decision he made that day. "Look, man, forget I said anything." Then he practically rushed to his car and left. Just like that. No explanation, no answers, just 100 questions. The whole drive home I kept replaying the conversation. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe the guy was weird. By the time I got home, I'd almost convinced myself to let it go. Emma was already there. She greeted me with a hug, asked about my day, made my favorite pasta, acted exactly like she always did. And for a while, I forgot about the guy. Until later that night, we were watching TV together when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and for the briefest moment, I saw pure panic on her face. Not annoyance, not surprise. Then she smiled, locked the screen, and put the phone upside down on the couch cushion. I don't know why, but that tiny moment stayed with me. After she went to sleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The conversation outside the grocery store kept replaying in my head. Eventually, I opened Facebook. I searched for the company where Emma worked. Then I started scrolling through employee profiles. It took about 20 minutes. And when I finally found the man from the parking lot, my stomach dropped. Because according to his profile, he didn't work in sales. He didn't work in Emma's company at all. In fact, he lived nearly 300 miles away. And based on the photos I found, he seemed to know my wife a lot better than a random stranger should. Much better. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the woman standing next to him in nearly every picture. A woman who looked exactly like my wife. Except she wasn't using the name Emma. I stared at the screen for what felt like an hour. The woman in those photos was my wife. Same smile, same dimples, same tiny scar near her eyebrow from a childhood bike accident. There was absolutely no doubt. It was Emma, but according to the profile, her name wasn't Emma. It was Rachel. At first I thought maybe it was some kind of joke. Maybe an old account. Maybe a nickname. Something innocent. I clicked deeper. The account wasn't old. It was active. Very active. Posts from last week. Comments from 3 days ago. Photos from 2 days ago. The woman calling herself Rachel had hundreds of friends. She interacted with people regularly. And the strangest thing? Nobody seemed confused about who she was. Everyone knew her as Rachel, not Emma. Rachel. I kept scrolling. The further I went, the worse it got. There were birthday messages, vacation photos, dinner parties, group pictures, entire events I'd never heard about. I was looking at years of memories. Yes, and I wasn't in a single one. Not one. It was like someone had created an alternate version of my wife's life. A life where I simply didn't exist. Then I found something that made my heart start pounding. A picture from 6 months earlier. Rachel Emma, whatever her real name even was at this point, was standing next to the guy from the grocery store. His arm was around her shoulders. They looked close. Very close. The caption read, "Couldn't have gotten through this year without you." The comments underneath were full of heart emojis and inside jokes. One comment stood out. A woman wrote, "You two seriously need to stop pretending you're not together." Rachel replied, "Maybe someday." My hands were shaking. I wanted to believe there was some explanation. Any explanation. But my brain was already putting pieces together. I clicked on the profile of the man from the grocery store. His name was Nathan. And that's when things became truly surreal. According to his profile, he was engaged. There were engagement photos everywhere. Dozens of them. And guess who had liked every single one? Rachel, my wife. The woman who kissed me goodbye every morning. The woman who slept beside me every night. The woman who told me she loved me. At this point, I wasn't even sure what I was looking at. Was she cheating with Nathan? Was she pretending to be someone else online? Why did she have a completely different name? Nothing made sense. Then I found the message that changed everything. It wasn't meant for me to see. One of Rachel's friends had posted photos from a weekend cabin trip. There were about 20 pictures. Most were normal. People around a campfire. People hiking. People drinking wine. Then I reached photo number 17, and my stomach dropped. There was Emma, holding hands with another man, not Nathan. A completely different man. They weren't standing together accidentally. They were clearly a couple, looking at each other, smiling, his hand resting on her waist. The caption underneath simply said, "Favorite couple of the weekend." I felt physically sick. I checked the date. The cabin trip had happened 8 months earlier. I knew exactly where Emma had told me she was that weekend. She'd said she was visiting her sick aunt. I'd even driven her to the airport. I remembered buying her coffee before the flight. I remembered telling her to be careful. I remembered missing her. Meanwhile, she was apparently at a romantic cabin retreat with another man. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the screen, trying to understand what was happening. Then my phone buzzed. A Facebook notification. Nathan had accepted my friend request. And a few seconds later, a message appeared. Just 3 words. "We need to talk." The message sat on my screen for almost a minute. "We need to talk." 3 words. That's all it took for me to realize my life was about to get a lot worse. I replied, "Who are you?" The answer came immediately. "Can you call?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to, but curiosity won. I sent him my number. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone rang. I stepped into the garage so I wouldn't wake Emma. My heart was pounding. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then Nathan spoke. "You really are her husband." Not a question, a statement. The way he said it made me feel sick. "Who are you?" I asked again. Nathan let out a long breath. I was hoping I was wrong. That wasn't an answer. "Nathan." His voice sounded exhausted. "I need you to understand something before we continue. Okay? I am not sleeping with your wife." For some reason, hearing that didn't make me feel any better. In fact, it made me feel worse. Because if he wasn't the affair partner, then what exactly was going on? Nathan continued, I've known her for about 4 years. 4 years. My stomach twisted. At that point, Emma and I had already been married for 2 years. Huh? I asked. We met through a volunteer group. Why did you look shocked when you saw me? Silence. Then he said something I'll never forget. Because she told everyone she was divorced. I felt like all the air had left my lungs. Divorced. Not married. Divorced. Nathan kept talking. She said her ex-husband was controlling. My chest tightened. She said the marriage ended badly. Every sentence felt like a punch. She said he was emotionally distant. What? She said he never supported her. What? She said she was rebuilding her life. What? I leaned against the wall. I couldn't speak. Nathan sounded uncomfortable. I didn't know that person was you. Neither did I. Because that person wasn't me. It was some fictional character she'd apparently created. Then Nathan asked a question. How long have you been married? 6 years. He went silent. Long enough that I checked whether the call had disconnected. Finally, he said, Oh my God. I already hated where this was going. What? Nathan laughed. Not because anything was funny. The kind of laugh people make when they're too shocked to process reality. She told us the divorce happened 5 years ago. I closed my eyes. 5 years, meaning that for almost our entire marriage she'd been telling people we were already divorced, living an entirely different narrative, an entirely different life. Then Nathan dropped another bombshell. You aren't the only husband. I froze. What? I said you're not the only husband. For a moment I thought I'd misheard him. You mean affair partner? No. His voice was deadly serious. I mean husband. The room started spinning. Nathan explained that several months earlier, people in their friend group had started noticing inconsistencies in Rachel's stories. Different dates, different details, different versions of her past. Eventually, one of their friends became suspicious. The friend hired a private investigator. At first, everyone thought they were being ridiculous. Then the investigator found records, photos, addresses, documents, things that didn't add up. According to Nathan, the investigator had uncovered evidence that Rachel Emma had been involved with multiple men across several cities over the years. Different names, different stories, different identities, and in at least one case a second marriage. I actually laughed, not because I believed him, because it sounded insane, like something from a movie. There is absolutely no way. I didn't believe it either. You're saying my wife has another husband? I'm saying that's what the investigator thought. The garage suddenly felt too small, too hot, too real. I heard the door from the house open. Emma was standing there, looking sleepy, wrapped in a blanket, the sweetest smile on her face. There you are, she said softly. I woke up and got worried. For a second I just stared at her, at the woman I'd loved for nearly a decade, the woman who had apparently been living lives I knew nothing about. And the scariest part? She looked completely genuine, completely innocent, completely believable. Nathan's voice was still coming through the phone, quietly, almost like a warning. Whatever you do, he said, don't tell her what you know yet. Unfortunately, it was already too late, because Emma had glanced at my phone screen, and she'd seen Nathan's name. The moment Emma saw Nathan's name on my screen, something changed. It lasted less than a second. A tiny crack in the mask, but I saw it. Pure panic. Then it vanished, just like that. Her expression softened. The sweet smile returned. The concerned wife was back. Who's Nathan? She asked casually. Too casually. I ended the call. Nathan understood immediately and hung up without saying anything. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then Emma walked over and wrapped her arms around me. Normally that would have comforted me. Instead, I felt like I was hugging a stranger. Is everything okay? He asked. I looked directly into her eyes and asked the simplest question possible. Do you know someone named Nathan? She didn't hesitate, not even for half a second. Oh, just like that. A lie, an effortless lie. One I knew was false. One she delivered while looking straight at me. That hit me harder than everything else. The photos, the messages, the fake identity, all of it was terrible. But watching someone you love lie without blinking, that does something to your brain. I suddenly started wondering how many other conversations in our marriage had been fake. How many times had she smiled and lied? How many memories were built on stories that weren't real? Then why did you react when you saw his name? I asked. She laughed, actually laughed. You're imagining things. The confidence was unbelievable. For a second I almost doubted myself. Almost. Then I remembered the photos, the comments, the messages, the years of evidence. I found Rachel's Facebook profile. The color drained from her face. Finally, a reaction. For the first time all night, she looked genuinely caught off guard. The silence stretched between us. Then something unexpected happened. she started crying. Immediately, like someone had flipped a switch. Tears, shaking hands, broken voice, the full performance. And I say performance because looking back, that's exactly what it was. At the time though, it worked. Part of me instantly wanted to comfort her. That's how conditioned I was. She sat down and buried her face in her hands. I didn't want you to find out like this. Find out what? She still hadn't admitted anything, but already she was acting like the victim. I asked the obvious question, who is Rachel? She took a deep breath. Then she gave me the first of many explanations. According to Emma, Rachel was originally an online nickname, a harmless identity she created years ago. Just a way to escape stress, a way to be someone else for a while. She claimed she never expected it to become so big, never expected it to grow into an entirely separate social circle, never expected things to get out of control. It was a decent story. The problem? It explained almost nothing. What about telling everyone you're divorced? More tears, more trembling. I was embarrassed. Embarrassed of what? Our marriage. That sentence felt like being punched in the chest. She immediately backtracked. No, that's not what I mean. But it was too late. The words were already out. Then came another explanation. She claimed she'd felt lonely, ignored, disconnected. She said pretending to be divorced made it easier to meet people, to make friends, to feel interesting. Again, none of it made sense. And every answer created 3 new questions. What about the cabin trip? Her face froze, just for a second. Then she recovered. That wasn't what it looked like. Of course it wasn't. According to her, nothing was what it looked like. The man holding her hand? A friend. The romantic photos? Misunderstandings. The comments calling them a couple? Jokes. Everything was always a joke, a misunderstanding, an accident, a coincidence. I noticed a pattern. Every time I brought up evidence, she'd explain that specific piece. But she never addressed the bigger picture. She never explained why she had created an entire alternate life. Then I asked the question that changed everything. Do you have another husband? Her crying stopped instantly. The room went silent, and for the first time all night she looked angry. Not sad, not guilty. Angry? What kind of question is that? I told her what Nathan had said. I told her about the investigator. I told her everything. And that's when she completely changed tactics. The tears disappeared. The sweetness disappeared. The apologetic tone disappeared. She stood up, crossed her arms, and stared at me. Then she said, I can't believe you're trusting strangers over your own wife. I felt my stomach drop, because suddenly the conversation wasn't about her lies anymore. It was about my behavior, my lack of trust, my investigation, my invasion of privacy. Somehow, within minutes, I was being treated like the problem. And the worst part? She was really good at it. By the end of the argument, I almost felt guilty. Almost. Until my phone buzzed again. A text from Nathan. Just one sentence. Check your email. I sent the investigator's report, and what I found inside that report would destroy the last bit of trust I still had left. I didn't open the report immediately. Part of me was terrified. As bad as things already were, I still believed there had to be a limit. Maybe Emma had lied online. Maybe she'd invented a fake identity. Maybe she'd gotten emotionally involved with someone. But surely there was a line she hadn't crossed. Surely there was some piece of the woman I married that was still real. Emma was still standing across from me, waiting, watching, trying to read my face. Who keeps texting you? She asked. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the email. The report was 37 pages long. Photos, timelines, public records, social media archives, travel records, screenshots. At first glance, it looked ridiculous, like something a conspiracy theorist would put together. Then I started reading, and everything got worse. The investigator had tracked 3 separate identities connected to Emma. Not 1, 3. There was Emma, there was Rachel, and there was another name I'd never heard before. Tovita. Different social circles, different friend groups, different backstories, different lives. My hands started shaking. According to the report, each identity had existed for years, not months. Yes, Emma tried to look over my shoulder. I stepped away. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't want her near me. The report continued. Rachel was the version of her I'd already discovered. The outgoing, recently divorced woman. The one with the volunteer groups and weekend trips. Sophia was something else entirely. Sophia lived mostly online. Different accounts. Different cities listed as her location. Different relationships. Different history. The investigator believed she'd spent years carefully maintaining multiple versions of herself. Not because she had to. Because she wanted to. I looked up at Emma. She was pale now. Very pale. Tell me this is fake. She didn't answer. Tell me. Still nothing. Then I reached the section labeled Known Romantic Relationships. That's when my world completely collapsed. The investigator had identified multiple men. Not one, not two, several. Some relationships appeared brief, others lasted years. Yes, while she was married to me. I kept reading. One man thought she was planning to move in with him. Another believed they were discussing marriage. Another believed she was separated and finalizing divorce paperwork. Every single one had been told a different story. Every single one believed they were getting a different version of Rachel, or Sophia, or whatever identity she was using with them. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A scan lease agreement, signed 18 months earlier. There was Emma's photograph, a different name, a different address, a small apartment 2 hours away from where we lived. I stared at it, and again, and again. My wife had apparently been renting another apartment for over a year. I looked at her. What is this? Her lips parted. No answer came out. What? Finally she spoke. It isn't what you think. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because at that point those words had become absurd. Nothing was ever what I thought. Nothing was ever what it looked like. Nothing was ever her fault. The apartment? Not what I thought. The fake identity? Not what I thought. The relationships? Not what I thought. The lies? Not what I thought. The entire marriage? Maybe not what I thought either. Then I reached the final section. The investigator's conclusion. I remember every word, not because I memorized them, because they burned themselves into my brain. Evidence suggests the subject maintains separate social and romantic lives with different groups of individuals. Multiple parties appear unaware of each other's existence. The behavior demonstrates a sustained pattern of deception over several years. Several years. Not a mistake, not a bad decision, not a rough patch. Yes, I looked up from the report. Emma was crying again, but something inside me had changed. A few hours earlier, I would have rushed to comfort her. Now I just felt tired, exhausted, empty. Then she said something that shocked me more than the report itself. You don't understand what I've been through. I blinked. What? You don't know how hard my life has been. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The discussion had somehow shifted again, away from the lies, away from the cheating, away from the double life, and back to her pain, her struggles, her feelings. She started talking about loneliness, stress, pressure, expectations, everything except the choices she'd made, everything except accountability. Then came the sentence that finally shattered whatever was left between us. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "If you had paid more attention to me, none of this would have happened." Silence. Absolute silence. After everything I'd just learned, after years of lies, after multiple identities, after multiple relationships, after secret apartments, after all of it, somehow this was my fault. And that's when I realized something terrifying. I wasn't arguing with someone trying to save a marriage. I was arguing with someone trying to save a story, and that story was falling apart. The next morning felt unreal. I hadn't slept. Emma hadn't slept either. We spent the entire night sitting in opposite rooms of the house, neither of us speaking. Every once in a while I'd hear her crying. A few months earlier that sound would have broken my heart. Now I didn't know what to feel. Around 8 a.m. my phone rang. It was Nathan. I answered immediately. His first question was simple. "Did you read it?" A long pause. Then he quietly said, "I'm sorry." I believed him. Because unlike everyone else involved in this mess, Nathan wasn't trying to convince me of anything. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't explaining away evidence. He wasn't manipulating the conversation. He was just sorry. Then he told me something unexpected. "You're not the first person I've talked to." "What do you mean?" "There are others." My stomach dropped. Others? Not just other relationships. Other victims. Other people who had discovered pieces of the truth. Apparently, after the investigator finished his work, several people connected to Rachel and Sophia had started comparing notes. The more they talked, the more contradictions appeared. Different birthdays, different hometowns, different jobs, different histories, different family stories. Emma had told each group a completely different version of who she was, and she'd done it so convincingly that nobody questioned it for years. Nathan asked if I wanted to join a video call later that day. At first I said no. The whole thing sounded insane, like some bizarre support group. Then he explained, "There are things you need to hear from them." So I agreed. A few hours later, I joined the call. There were 6 people. Nathan, 2 women, 3 men, and me. The strangest part? Everyone looked nervous. Like nobody wanted to be there. Like nobody could believe why they were there. The first person who spoke was a man named Eric. Eric was in his early 40s. He looked exhausted. The moment he started talking, I understood why. He explained that he dated Sophia for nearly 2 years. 2 years. He genuinely believed they were building a future together. According to him, she talked about buying a house, starting a business, getting married someday. Everything. Then one day she'd simply vanished. No explanation, no closure, nothing. At the time, he thought she'd lost interest. Now he knew she had been juggling multiple lives simultaneously. Then another person spoke, a woman named Kelly. Kelly wasn't a romantic partner. She was one of Rachel's closest friends, or at least she thought she was. Tears filled her eyes as she described years of friendship, years of birthdays, vacations, road trips, late-night conversations. Then she looked directly into the camera and said, "I don't know if I ever knew her." That sentence hit me harder than I expected, because I felt exactly the same way. I had shared a bed with Emma for 6 years, and suddenly I wasn't sure I knew her either. Then came the biggest shock. The final person on the call was a man named Michael. When Michael appeared on screen, the room went silent. Even Nathan looked uncomfortable. I immediately understood why. Michael wasn't a boyfriend. He wasn't a friend. He wasn't a co-worker. Michael had been engaged to Rachel. Officially engaged. He held up photographs. There she was, my wife, wearing an engagement ring, standing beside him, smiling, looking happy, looking completely genuine. The photos had been taken 14 months earlier. 14 months earlier, at the exact same time she was celebrating our wedding anniversary with me. I couldn't breathe. I actually had to mute myself for a moment. Michael continued talking. He explained that Rachel had claimed her divorce from her ex-husband was finalized years ago. She showed him documents, photos, stories, everything, all fake or heavily manipulated. Michael eventually learned the truth when Rachel abruptly ended their relationship. At the time, he didn't understand why. Now he believed she'd become afraid of being exposed. Then he said something that froze everyone on the call. "I wasn't the only fiancé." Silence. Nathan frowned. "What?" Michael nodded. "A few months ago, I found another guy." Apparently, before the investigator even became involved, Michael had discovered evidence suggesting Rachel had promised marriage to someone else entirely. A different man, in a different state, using yet another version of her identity. Nobody spoke. At that point, the situation had become almost impossible to comprehend. How did one person manage all of this? How did she remember all the lies? How did nobody discover it sooner? Then Michael asked me a question I'd been avoiding. "Do you still believe her?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again, because honestly, I didn't know. Not because I believed her explanations, but because accepting the alternative was devastating. If all of this was true, then the woman I loved had spent years lying to everyone around her, including me, especially me. The call ended shortly afterward. I sat alone in the kitchen staring at nothing. Eventually Emma walked in. She looked exhausted. Red eyes, messy hair. She sat across from me. For a long time neither of us spoke. Then she quietly asked, "Are they telling stories about me?" I laughed bitterly. Stories. That word again. As if all of this were gossip. Rumors. Yuama. Not years of deception. Then I asked her a question. One simple question. The same question I'd been asking myself all day. Who are you really? For the first time since this nightmare began, she didn't have an answer. Who are you really? The question hung in the air between us. For once, Emma didn't have an immediate response. No explanation. No tears. No carefully crafted story. Nothing. She just sat there staring at the table. And honestly, that scared me more than any answer could have. Because throughout our entire relationship, Emma always had an answer. Always. Now she looked like someone who had run out of them. Several minutes passed before she finally spoke. Quietly. "I don't know anymore. I wish I could tell you that hearing those words gave me clarity. It didn't. If anything, it made everything worse. Because for the first time, she sounded honest. And after everything that had happened, I didn't know how to process that. Over the next few hours, pieces of the truth started coming out. Not all of it. Probably not even most of it. But enough. According to Emma, the lies had started long before she met me. She described creating alternate versions of herself as a teenager. At first it was harmless. Online accounts, fake names, invented stories, different personalities, different lives. She said it made her feel powerful, important, interesting. If one version of herself failed, she could simply become someone else. At some point, the habit stopped being a game. It became part of who she was, or maybe who she wasn't. When she met me, she claimed she genuinely loved me. And strangely enough, I believed that part, because despite everything, I still couldn't convince myself that every moment of our marriage had been fake. The problem was that loving me hadn't stopped her from continuing the lies. Over time, she kept creating new identities, new social circles, new relationships, new stories. Every version of herself received attention, validation, affection, and eventually she became addicted to it. At least that's how she described it. I listened, but every explanation raised another question. Why not get help? No answer. Why cheat? No answer. Why keep going after you realized how much damage you were causing? No answer. The conversation went in circles for hours. Then I asked about the apartment, the secret apartment, the one from the investigator's report. Emma closed her eyes. For a moment, I thought she wasn't going to respond. Then she nodded. It was mine. Hearing her admit it felt surreal. One of the biggest mysteries in the report. Hemford. Just like that. She explained that she'd rented it under another identity. It was where she stayed during certain weekends. The weekends, she told me she was visiting family, work conferences, volunteer events, networking trips. All lies? Years of lies. I felt sick, but then something unexpected happened. She admitted there were details the investigator never found. That caught my attention immediately. What details? Emma hesitated, a warning sign I'd learned to recognize. Then she said, there was someone else. At first, I thought she meant another boyfriend, another affair, another victim. At that point, I wouldn't have been surprised. But she shook her head. No, not like that. Then she told me about a woman named Lauren. Lauren wasn't a romantic partner. Lauren was someone Emma had met years earlier. Someone who knew about all the identities. Someone who had helped maintain them, covered for them, protected them. A confidante, a secret keeper. My stomach dropped. Because suddenly this wasn't just one person's deception anymore. Someone else had known. Someone else had watched this happen for years, and apparently said nothing. Then Emma revealed something even worse. Lauren had contacted her the previous evening, after hearing that everything was collapsing, after hearing that I'd found out. And according to Emma, Lauren was threatening to expose everything publicly. Social media, friends, employers, family members, everyone. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Then I realized something important. Emma was terrified, not of losing me, not of divorce, not of consequences. She was terrified of losing control of the narrative, of the stories, of the identities. The thing she feared most wasn't the truth. It was the truth being told by someone else. Then I asked the question that had been bothering me all day. Is there anything else? Her eyes filled with tears, and immediately I knew. There was. Of course there was. There was always something else. Another secret, another lie, another hidden piece. She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Then she whispered, there's one thing I never told anyone. I felt my heart sink. What is it? The silence seemed endless. Finally she answered, and what she said changed the entire situation again. Because the biggest lie of all wasn't about Rachel, wasn't about Sophia, wasn't about the affairs, wasn't about the apartment. It was something much older, something she'd hidden from everyone, including me, for almost 10 years. I sat perfectly still. At that point, I thought I was prepared for anything. I was wrong. Emma looked like she was about to fall apart. Not the dramatic crying I'd seen before. Not the emotional performances that always seemed to appear at convenient moments. This was different. She looked genuinely terrified. What is it? I asked. For a long time she said nothing. Then she finally spoke. My name isn't Emma. I stared at her. Of all the things I expected to hear, that wasn't one of them. What? She swallowed hard. The name you know me by isn't my legal name. At first I thought she was joking, or deflecting, or creating another distraction. But she wasn't smiling. She wasn't acting. She looked exhausted. If aita. The explanation came slowly. Years before I met her, she'd legally changed her name. Not because she was hiding from the law. Not because of crime. Not because of debt. Because she wanted to escape her past. The problem wasn't the name change itself. People do that. The problem was that she never told me. Not when we dated. Not when we got engaged. Not when we got married. Never. The woman I thought I knew had introduced herself using a name she'd chosen for herself. A carefully selected version of who she wanted to be, and somehow that felt symbolic of everything else. The entire marriage suddenly looked different. Not because of the name, because of what it represented. Every difficult truth had been replaced with a more comfortable story. Every flaw hidden, every mistake buried, every uncomfortable reality edited. I asked her what her original name was. When she told me, I didn't recognize it, not even slightly. It sounded like the name of a stranger, which, in a way, it was. Then she showed me something. A box. A small locked box I'd never seen before. She retrieved it from the back of a closet. Inside were photographs, documents, letters, pieces of a life I'd never known existed. Her childhood, her family, old friends, old addresses, a history she'd carefully erased. For the next 2 hours, I looked through everything, and the strangest thing happened. For the first time since this nightmare began, I started seeing a real person. Not Rachel, not Sophia, not Emma. Just a deeply flawed human being who had spent years running from herself. None of it excused what she'd done, not even close. But it explained something. The lies weren't just about fooling other people. They were about avoiding herself, avoiding reality, avoiding consequences, avoiding pain. She'd built so many identities that eventually she got lost among them. By evening, we were both emotionally exhausted. The anger was still there. The betrayal was still there. But beneath it was something else. Grief, because no matter what happened next, the marriage I thought I had was gone. It would never come back. Then came the hardest conversation of my life. What happens now? He asked. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in days, there were no excuses, no manipulations, no blame, no stories. Just two broken people sitting across from each other. I thought about everything we'd shared, the good memories, the bad memories, the years together, the future we'd planned. Then I thought about the lies, the affairs, the secret apartment, the identities, the deception, and I realized something. Love wasn't the problem. I still loved her, in some strange, painful way I probably always would. The problem was trust, and trust wasn't damaged. It was destroyed. Completely. There was nothing left to rebuild from. Tears rolled down her face before I even spoke. I think she already knew. I can't do this anymore, I said quietly. She closed her eyes. No argument, no bargaining, no attempts to change my mind. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes when both people already know the outcome. That night, I packed a bag. Not because I hated her, not because I wanted revenge. Because I needed distance. Because I needed reality. Because I needed to figure out who I was outside the chaos she'd created. As I walked toward the door, she asked one final question. A question I'll never forget. Was any of it real? I stopped. For a moment, I considered all the lies, all the manipulation, all the pain. Then I answered honestly, yes, because despite everything, I believed some of it had been real. The laughter, the memories, the love. Not all of it, maybe not even most of it, but some of it. And somehow that made losing it hurt even more. I left without looking back. The next chapter of my life was beginning, and for the first time in years, neither of us knew what story came next. It's been a little over a year since I walked out of that house. A lot of people asked for an update. Some wanted to know if Emma and I reconciled. Some thought the whole story sounded too insane to be real. Honestly, if I hadn't lived through it myself, I'd probably feel the same way. The divorce took 8 months. Surprisingly, it wasn't ugly, at least not legally. Emotionally, that's a different story. After I left, we spoke occasionally through lawyers and a few direct conversations. The woman I talked to during those months wasn't the same person I confronted that night. The anger was gone. The defensiveness was mostly gone. Even the constant excuses started disappearing. For the first time in our relationship, she seemed exhausted by lying, almost as if maintaining all those identities had become impossible, which I guess it had. One by one, the lives she'd built collapsed. Rachel disappeared. Sophia disappeared. The fake social circles unraveled. People compared stories. People shared screenshots. People discovered contradictions. The truth spread faster than any lie could keep up with. Some friendships ended immediately. Some people never spoke to her again. Others tried to help. A few were surprisingly compassionate. But nobody trusted her anymore. And trust, once broken on that scale, is difficult to recover. During the divorce process, I started therapy. That was probably the best decision I made. For months, I couldn't stop questioning reality. Every memory felt suspicious. Every story felt questionable. I found myself wondering whether entire years of my life had been fake. My therapist helped me understand something important. Just because someone lies doesn't mean every moment was a lie. That distinction mattered a lot, because if I convinced myself everything had been fake, I'd lose the good memories too. And despite everything, there were good memories. I refused to let the betrayal steal those from me. A few months after the divorce was finalized, something unexpected happened. Emma reached out, not to reconcile, not to ask for another chance, just to talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small coffee shop halfway between our cities. I hadn't seen her in almost a year. She looked different. Not physically, just quieter. The constant performance seemed gone. For nearly 2 hours we talked. About everything. About nothing. About the marriage. About the damage. About the people she'd hurt. At one point she told me she'd finally started intensive therapy herself. Whether that was enough or not wasn't for me to decide. But she seemed sincere. Then she said something I still think about. You know what the worst part was? I didn't answer. She looked down at her coffee. I got so good at becoming different people that eventually I stopped knowing who I actually was. For years, I'd imagined some mastermind, some manipulative genius controlling every situation. The reality was stranger and sadder. She wasn't managing multiple lives because she knew who she was. She was managing multiple lives because she didn't. That doesn't excuse anything. Not the cheating, not the lies, not the betrayal, but it does explain part of it. When we left, we hugged goodbye. Just once. No romance. No dramatic reunion. No second chance. Just closure. Real closure. The kind I never thought I'd get. And for me, life moved forward. Slowly. Then all at once. I changed jobs. Moved cities. Made new friends. Started rebuilding. And eventually, I met someone. I won't turn this into a fairy tale ending. Life isn't that neat. But for the first time in years, I experienced something I hadn't realized I was missing. Consistency. No secret identities. No impossible stories. No constant confusion. Just honesty. Ordinary, boring honesty. And after everything I'd been through, it felt incredible. So what did I learn? A few things. First, trust your instincts when something consistently feels wrong. Second, being kind and being honest are not the same thing. For years, I confused the two. Emma was incredibly sweet, thoughtful, affectionate, generous. But kindness without honesty is still deception. Third, when someone responds to their own wrongdoing by making you feel guilty for discovering it, pay attention. That's not accountability. That's manipulation. And finally, you can love someone deeply and still walk away. Those two things can exist at the same time. For a long time, I thought leaving meant the love wasn't real. Now I understand the opposite. Sometimes leaving is what happens when you finally accept reality. If anyone reading this is going through something similar, here's my advice. Don't waste years trying to solve a puzzle made entirely of lies. At some point, the question stops being whether they're telling the truth. The question becomes whether you can build a future without needing to investigate every word they say. I couldn't, and that's why I left. I don't hate Emma. I don't even wish her harm. I genuinely hope she finds peace. I hope she figures out who she is. I hope she becomes the person she spent so many years pretending to be. But that journey isn't mine anymore. It's hers. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm finally writing my own story. This is the end of the story. Don't forget to share with your friends, comment, like, and subscribe.